that will open a door that you begin to ask questions. I mean, it didn't just counting the parking spaces didn't uncover the fraud, but later when I started comparing revenue to the parking, it never matched up. It was as if half the parking spaces were never rented, but the reality was 100% of them were. And then I discovered no cash had been deposited for 17 years.
Wow.
People were showing up at the office and paying their monthly parking in cash, and it just wasn't making to the account.
Mm-hmm.
That's what happened with cash.
What always happens with cash? It gets spent.
That's right.
By a person who isn't entitled to spend it. Yeah, we lost a vice president. But the state of Massachusetts gained a resident in their public facilities. I forget how much it came out to. 17 years. Yeah. You got a lot of money. A lot of cash. What time is it? Ooh. So how many are joining us today? Do we know? Plus or minus?
So we do not know. It varies sometimes. I mean, we've had as few as like 25, but then we've also had as many as 120. So we never know until that day.
Well, yeah, I'll tell you a quick anecdote if there's time. One of my very first speaking engagements for the ACFE was as Master of Ceremonies at the 2017 conference in Orlando. And just before I went on stage, Jim Ratley walked up to me, who was president of the ACFE at the time, and said, "Have you ever spoken in front of 2,000 people before?" And I said, "Not at one time." And it was a rather large audience. But once you start, things kind of fall into place.
Oh yeah, so we're going to give it about another minute. We are right at 2:01, so we'll give a few guests a little bit of an opportunity to join us, and then we will get started.
Great. Let me know when. Go away.
All right, so we are at 2:02, and so I am going to stop the slideshow and get us started. So it looks like we have about 27 people on with us now. So we're going to start our session for today. I want to say thank you all for joining us on this lovely Wednesday afternoon. We are here for our Student Leadership Series event for November 17th. And this week is a very special and very cool week in the business world because it is International Fraud Awareness Week. And we are celebrating International Fraud Awareness Week by hosting a CFE, and our program chair, Matt Njoku, he will be introducing our special guest today. So we invite you to ask questions and we invite you to enjoy what he has to share with us this afternoon. So I am Marcia Colson, the Associate Dean of Business and Accounting here. And with that welcome, I would like to introduce you to Matt Njoku, who will lead us through the remainder of our program this afternoon. Matt, would you like to take the floor?
Thank you, Marshall. Good afternoon, everybody. It is very exciting to have this going on, and the individual we have today is somebody that we all can learn from, and I'm excited about what he's going to say. I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker today, and this is a section of accounting and finance, and fraud has become a very, very area that has been making a very big impact in the economy, on individuals, and so the college has started to get into the direction of focusing on fraud prevention and deterrence. So, and we are very fortunate to have this individual that has gotten so many experiences in this direction. Our guest speaker today is Alan Brockman. And let me tell you a little bit about tell you a little bit about Alan. Mr. Brockman is a leading anti-fraud speaker with over 30 years of experience in information system security and fraud investigation. He speaks to colleges, professional associations, government agencies, focusing on forensic technology, internet investigations, fraud investigations, Ponzi schemes, ethics, fraudster motivation, and compliance. Mr. Brockman has extensive consulting experience with small to medium-sized businesses, including retail, real estate, manufacturing, and not-for-profit organizations. He became a certified fraud examiner in 1993 and has worked on a variety of fraud cases in internal audit and information technology that resulted to several $1 million of recovery. He worked for the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, ACFE, from 2006 to 2017, managing domestic and international conference educational content, new seminar development, and online learning. It is important to note that Mr. Brockman is during his time at ACFE, he also conducted trainings around the globe, including his recent speaking at international conference in Dubai, as well as domestically, Las Vegas and other parts of the United States. Prior to joining ACFE, Mr. Brockman spent 20 years working in higher education as Director of Internal Audit, managing IT projects, specializing in information and asset security. He also taught college courses in accounting, auditing, as well as in information system security. Ladies and gentlemen, I do hope that after his speaking today, he may agree to join us as a faculty member, as an adjunct, to bring all his wealth of experience to continue to help us improve our program. I hereby hand you over to Mr. Alan Brockman.
Oh, thank you, Matthew. I appreciate the invite. And now, after that wonderful introduction, I guess we can go right on to questions and answers. We have time left, right? Let me just explain how a person who had a 4-year bachelor degree in accounting ended up in the fraud world, and it was more by accident than on purpose. And it really is one of those accidents of nature. And as I was explaining to some of your faculty earlier, it is an accident sometimes to get into the fraud field. I was trained as an accountant, I was trained as an auditor, and I stumbled upon what was a rather substantial fraud. And it was as simple as counting the number of parking spaces in a building that the organization that I was working for was managing. And I discovered that the number of parking spaces, which were sold at 100%, were never, the income never matched the sales, if you will. And we found out that the person who had been handling the receipts and handling the transactions and keeping the books for 17 years had been pocketing all the cash. Once you count the spaces, obviously things should match up, but they didn't. No cash had ever been deposited. Nobody noticed. I did, and I was, in a lot of ways, promoted from that. I was given the retail division, and I discovered fraud in the retail division, as you might guess can happen. I spent 15 years, I'd been hired away, spent 15 years in a retail organization developing their safety security audit programs. We managed to, I had a team, a field of auditors, probably 15, I think it was 15 people, spread out over 20 states, including North Carolina, Charlotte specifically, Charlotte, Greensboro, and Raleigh. We had stores there. And eventually went on to work at a college as the director of internal audit. Their audit committee had recommended, their auditors had recommended to the audit committee that they needed an audit department. So they brought me in. I developed the audit department and spent 20 years at a college in Boston where I experienced some fraud work. And actually the biggest fraud of my career occurred there. And we'll get to that a little bit later. But my experiences in fraud prior to becoming a CFE were extensive. I graduated college in 1970. And so by the time I became a fraud examiner, a CFE in 1993, the organization was only 5 years old. And I became a semi-active member. I attended some sessions. And once I did become a member, I started taking some of their educational training. They offer a variety of training. And what I discovered that in the previous 20 years from the training that I took, because education, lifelong education is very important. It cannot be minimized. What I understood from that session that I took with the ACFE was that I was doing some things right and I was doing a lot of things wrong. And what happened was I learned from their training how to correct the mistakes I was making, and my fraud work improved significantly. So that's kind of the benefit of staying on top of the technology, staying on top of what's happening, and continuing to pursue this type of thing. But I want to go a little further with this. My personal feeling in terms of fraud consists of a series of steps. Fraud prevention consists of a series of steps that organizations can take. And the first step is awareness. Fraud Awareness Week is a big piece of that. We try to bring and when I say we, I'm retired from the ACFE. I retired in 2017, and I've been pretty much on my own ever since. I actually shaved and put on a tie today, probably for the first time in 2 years. The first step, as I said, is awareness. If an organization starts to believe that they might have a problem, they might be exposed to a problem, the first thing you can do is bring your organization together and talk to them about fraud. Create an awareness that it can happen. Create an awareness that these types of things can happen. As the ACFE report to the nations shows, an organization loses about 5% of its gross revenues to fraud. And that's significant. That's money that could be spent on research and development, salaries, infrastructure, any number of things. So that 5% can be very harmful for some organizations. Some organizations can't survive with that kind of a loss year after year. The second step in a program is if you create awareness, and then you want to create something that prevents fraud from happening. Control, separation of duties. You want to review how you do things, how your organization is structured, so that people aren't doing the same job. The large fraud that I talked about, that I'll talk about a little bit later, the college fraud, was effectively a separation of duties issue. It was one person doing a lot of things that should have been spread amongst a couple of people. Small organizations don't have that luxury, so they have to work around some of those things. So you need a method of prevention. Separation of duties is one of those things. Control that help prevent fraud, once again, that allow individuals to review transactions so they can see if things are flowing properly. The next step in my program would be deterrence. You need something that will deter people from committing fraud. And I've always been a firm believer of the last step, and that's prosecution. If we catch you, we're going to prosecute. We may not be successful. You may walk away. We may not get a dime back, but everybody's going to know we tried. So prosecution is a big deterrence. Also, where you're going to lose your job. I have seen frauds in organizations where they just said, we're going to make this quietly go away, and we're going to transfer Brian. Apologies to any Brians online. We're going to transfer Brian to a new department, and that's not a deterrence in any way. The next step, of course, is the detection mechanism. Audits, your year-end audit, your auditors come in. They're not looking for fraud. Usually their audit programs do not have fraud checklists, although that's evolving significantly in the last 15 or 20 years, where a lot of fraud is uncovered through year-end audits. But internal audits is a very, very strong detection mechanism. They're checking to see that everything is working the right way. You can walk into an auditee and ask them how they do things, and they'll say, oh, we do it A, B, C, and D, and they give you the exact answer that's in the procedures manual. This is exactly how they do it. But once you observe that, it may not be the case. So a detection mechanism is important. Once fraud is discovered, heaven forbid, you want to have a program where you have an investigation structure. And this can often be very political, very political. Depends upon the size of the organization again. If you have a large organization that has shareholders, boards of trustees, and of course, a lot of organizations have boards of trustees, they need to be involved. They need to be alerted that there is a fraud, a suspected fraud, and that this is going to how to be handled. But that message has to be developed before the fraud is found. An organization has to come up with a way of controlling an investigation. One of the organizations that I worked at, I was the only CFE on staff, only person that had been trained, and my training had continued and continued. I had continued to go to ACFE events, I'd continued to go to IIA events and others, and I was the only CFE. And our public safety department, nope, they wanted to investigate. Our legal department, nope, they wanted to investigate. And finally, the president of the organization said, Alan's going to head the team. The rest of you can be on it, but Alan's going to direct this team because he's got the professional background to do it. And it worked out well. But if you don't have that set up from the get-go, an organization you can lose a lot of valuable time. So an investigation plan prior to the need for an investigation is, of course, important. And the last two steps, once you've got your investigation going, once you've determined the scope of the fraud, the amount of the loss, and damages to the organization, you need a remediation method, a way of getting your money back if you can, or if it's merchandise, getting your merchandise back. It's very important. And finally, one of my favorites is prosecution. And that is a real key. When I worked in retail, we made it a point to, if we found somebody who was committing fraud, we would have them arrested publicly in the store during business hours, in front of customers and employees. And you can't imagine what an effect that had on deterrence. We didn't have to really pay too much attention to watching that store after that for a while, because people knew we were on top of it. So those are the kind of the steps: the awareness, the prevention, deterrence, detection, investigation, remediation, and prosecution. Now, not all organizations are going to jump on prosecution. You read in the papers every day of people who are dismissed and made an arrangement and are just not being prosecuted, not going to jail, and not being even put out under suspended sentence. And with it, that makes it a little tough, because if that person goes to another job, what can you say when you get a reference? From my understanding, the best you can say is, we wouldn't hire that person back. But a criminal record is a little different story. So let's move on to one of my favorite topics: who experiences fraud. And the simple answer, I think, is just about everyone. If, as a friend of mine once said, if you haven't experienced fraud, if you don't have fraud in your organization, it either hasn't happened yet, or you haven't noticed that it has happened. The ACFE, and I'd highly recommend you go to acfe.com and get a copy of this. You can just type it into the search bar there. Get the most current report to the nations that is available. They're doing another survey now, so there'll be a new one out in 2022. So the one that's out now is 2020, and it has a wealth of information. It talks about the 5% that I talked about, the 5% loss, but it also talks about who finds fraud. And this is a question that is very interesting, because despite internal controls, despite year-end audits with professional CPAs, despite having an internal mechanism for deterrence and detection, having an audit department, the number one way frauds are found is because of whistleblowers, people coming forward, somebody seeing something and saying something about it. That is incredibly valuable. So organizations that have whistleblower programs, hotlines, things like that are ahead of the game in terms of being able to prevent or head off any potential frauds, or stop a fraud before it gets to be the magnitude gets to be too great. So the report to the nations, it talks about different industries, different countries, different fraud mechanisms. There is a fraud tree in there that describes all the different types of frauds, and there are a lot. Fundamentally, it's you're depriving an organization of their resources, and you're doing it in a way that is hidden. I think that's the key to why it's a fraud and not a theft. You can back a truck up to a warehouse and fill it with merchandise and drive away, and that's not fraud. But if you do that and you leave empty boxes scattered around, so it looks like the inventory is still there, there's your deception. So the critical components here are, it can happen to anybody. I've had in private consulting, I've had organizations tell me, well, we don't have fraud here. It can't happen here. I once provided a new retail business, with a series of recommendations that it was a family business, small family business that was growing. And I presented recommendations that really boiled down to separation of duties. And I was fired off the engagement because the owner thought I was accusing his family of being thieves. Okay, so I left the engagement. 2 years later, because his company had expanded so greatly, no control had changed. No separation of duty issues had changed. And the people he trusted that used to have the jobs didn't have those jobs anymore. New people did, and they robbed him blind and put him out of business. And it could have simply been prevented. He did call me several years later and explained what happened to his business, and said, "Alan, you were right." And what I said at the time was, "Well, it doesn't look like being right ever changed a thing." And it was really sad, because it was a great business, but he got too trusting. So it can happen here. Fraud can really, really be part of your organization's existence in a way that you don't know. It can happen almost in any department. In a college, your procurement department, accounting, of course, faculty. Faculty travel was big at the organization that I was at for 20 years, and we were always auditing their travel. We had procurement cards. We were always auditing procurement cards. and we'd catch some things. Were they fraud? No, they weren't. They might have been simple mistakes, which brings me to my next point. The fraud the huge fraud at the college, and it wasn't at a college, it was at a subsidiary school. We had a small technical school that we had acquired. And as I said, small, separation of duties were a little shaky there. But one of the things that I've always observed is that in its initial stages, fraud and stupidity look a lot alike. That if you are an auditor and you walk into an organization and you sit down and you say, well, how come you didn't do this? The person might go, oh, I made a mistake, or oh, I forgot, oh, but I fixed it. And that's the little case study we're going to jump into in a while. We'll touch upon that because that's exactly what happened. The controller of the organization said, I used the wrong deposit slip. I was basically saying I was stupid. Because as you know, if you walk in and accuse somebody of being, ask them, are you stupid or are you a thief? They're going to choose stupid because the other is obviously not acceptable. But the reality is the simplest things that can be shrugged off as a simple mistake might not be. And if you don't follow up those simple mistakes, and they can be simple deviations from policies and procedures. They can be simple deviations from the way things are normally done. So-and-so was on vacation, so I took over their work. Were you supposed to? No. Things like that. So you need to be on top of those types of questions. You can't just take the first answer always and walk away. And I think when we get to it, we'll see this. So getting back to education, from what I've been able to see from the course outlines that you folks are doing, you're doing great. The fraud examination course, terrific, absolutely terrific. The the forensic accounting and computer security, perfect. Forensic accounting is very, very important. Being able to drill down into a series of transactions to find out what really happened. You know, I don't know how many people are professional accountants out there or have worked in an accounting office, but journal entries, boy, drilling down into journal entries. Where did this go? Journalizing something into one account and then journalizing it right back out again and digging through that kind of paperwork is great fun. Piecing those things together, I used to love that. I used to love the papers spread out all over the place. And that's the kind of detailed work that is really, really important in fraud examination, accounting, forensic accounting. As I always say, not all forensic accounting has to do with fraud. Forensic accountants have a wide opportunities in the field. They can work for attorneys. They can work for bankruptcies, divorces. There's just a huge calling for where did this money go? Where did this money come from? And it's great. Of course, computer security is top of my list. I have been dealing with computer security since I got my MBA. My MBA is actually in it, and I just love digging down into the dirt of computer security, digital forensics, and things like that. And of course, back to fraud examination, it opens the door. The course that I took from the ACFE was effectively the fraud examination course. It's called the Principles of Fraud Examination. And the principles covered principles of fraud examination. And it pretty much is that book you're using now. It's an expanded version of it. It was a 4-day course, a full immersion 4-day course. And I think I took it once, and I took the advanced course 2 or 3 times just to keep the skills up, because that's important. You can never stop learning. There's always somebody out there that's trying to break something that you set up. For every control that you might implement at an organization, there's somebody that is going to try to come up with a way to circumvent that control for their own purposes. Sometimes for their own profit, more often for their own profit. So I think the CPCC courses that you are offering are, a great start. I don't think it's the end of it. I think there's probably room for a lot more, and I'm sure I can get a lot of the faculty to nod, yes, that's true. We want to do more. We want to do more, and that's great. That's terrific. The other positive thing is there is, I mean, I don't know how many students you have and how many professionals you have that are taking these courses, but joining the ACFE as a associate member, if you're not a CFE, if you're a CFE, you're a member, but joining as an associate opens the door to a lot of resources. Joining as a student member opens the door to a lot of resources. The ACFE has a tremendous amount of data that they collect throughout the years, plus they have checklists. As I said, the report to the nations cannot be, whenever the report to the nations is released, it shows up on all the business channels where the talking heads, the hosts there are talking to the ACFE. I've been interviewed about it on TV. Most of the officers and directors at the ACFE have been interviewed about it. So it is a great educational resource at all itself. I don't know how much more time I have to prattle on, but before we open it up to questions and answers. But I do have a brief little case study, if you will. I have cheat cards here, and what I'm going to describe is a small organization with a lack of, and this is to generate discussion. A small organization with a small staff, limited separation of duties. And what they have is, I hope you can read these. See if I can get this right. 2 bank accounts, 1 petty cash, and 1 main account. Okay, so there's only 2 bank accounts we need to worry about. On day 1, the daily receipts from goods and services, are deposited. I just made up an amount, obviously, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, are deposited into the petty cash account. They shouldn't be going into the petty cash account, obviously. On day 2, the error is discovered. Error is discovered. Hold on. I'm having trouble doing. I'm being a little dyslexic with the camera here. On day 2, the error is discovered, and a check is written from the petty cash account. Okay, so we have the money is deposited into the petty cash account in error, and a check is drawn from the petty cash account for the same amount. On day 3, a deposit into the main account for $1,234 occurs. A year and a half later, $1.5 million has disappeared. Auditors came in. Now, if the auditors came in and looked at the bank statements, the year-end auditors, and they noticed the check coming out of the deposit going into the petty cash account, and they asked about that, and he said, "Oh, see this amount? I wrote a check out of this account the next day and put it into the main account." And he showed them the bank account, and he showed them the deposit into the main account, and it also showed the amount coming out of the petty cash account. And the auditor checked a box and walked away. And as I spoke to Matthew earlier about this, I said, what one question could the auditor have asked that would have revealed the fraud? And that's my question to you. And we can discuss. First of all, let me ask you all a question. Does it look like any money is missing?
Possible.
Yep, I think so.
How? If the money went into the petty cash account, came out of the petty cash account, and the same amount went into the main account.
Well, it seems to me that there is no the internal control is weak because there's no separation of,
Right.
duties.
Right.
Because it could be one person has a whole lot of responsibilities that he could also put something else in a different account. They have the.
Anybody else?
Did the check clear?
Yes, the check cleared.
Was the check larger than the $1,200 some odd dollar amount?
It's exactly the same amount to the penny, and we're talking, yeah, to the penny. The solution, I mean, I'd be glad if you want to wave the white flag. The solution is fairly straightforward if you're the auditor. The question the auditor should have asked was, can I see the deposit ticket to the main account? What should have been on that deposit ticket? The check. But when you looked at the deposit ticket, really, the check wasn't there. It was a different deposit forced to the same amount. The check was made out to cash and was put in his personal account. So what he was doing, he was creating two matching deposits, and he balanced them by writing personal checks to balance the amount. So the two checks, the two deposits, the first deposit was legitimate. It went into the petty cash account. The check that came out of the petty cash account went into his personal account. The second deposit was just a second deposit. The deposit into the main account should have had one item on it, and that was the check. And his response when asked how this could happen, he said, I was stupid. I picked the wrong deposit ticket. And the auditor walked away. And if you looked at his bank statements over the years, it happened over and over and over again. And so I think the largest single transaction was $73,000. So that's it. It looks on the surface legit. Everything looks fine. But if somebody had asked at any one point, that somebody turned out to be me while it was well into the fraud, what does this second deposit look like? When I saw it to the exact same amount, I asked, well, then where did this check go? And 24 hours later, he was arrested as we put the numbers together.
Could I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So if I understand that if the deposit was made, into the petty cash, and then he, put it into his account, I know that's fraud there. And if it was, but he put the money into the main account the next day.
Yep.
And so although it is procedural, you're right, it's fraud, is he really stealing anything or taking anything?
Yes, because the second deposit was completely made up of, let's say I get checks from three people, A, B, and C, and they equal a certain amount. And I take that money and I use checks from E, F, and G as a replacement for that. It was a strange kind of kiting that he was doing. He was literally making up the deposit he should have made in the first place with other monies that came in. His accounts receivable were always a little shaky too, but he had explanations for that because it was a small school. It was student loan money that was coming in from the government. So the government got involved eventually, which was really pleasant. And he was taking checks and making up two matching deposits using a variety of checks from different sources. And it was two different deposits for two different amounts. And as I said, he used his own money, and probably our money, to balance those out, because you know how it is. Those numbers aren't always rounded, nice, easy numbers. So it was quite a clever scheme. Could have been unraveled a lot earlier, and it's a shame it wasn't. But the justice was served. We fixed that problem. most notably by eventually selling the school. But that's how easy it is to miss something that's very obvious. You know, I don't blame the external auditor. He and another time it was a she. This showed up at 2 year-end audits and wasn't flagged as a recurring thing. Previously, the month preceding the close and the month after the close, he didn't do any of this. So his bank statements look clean. But he slipped a couple of times and his bank statements weren't clean. And he corrected that problem and did it right after that by making sure that when the auditors came, the bank statements looked clean. So, but like I say, when asked, he chose stupid. So I'm open to any questions at this point. Anything anybody has to add to what I've said? Anybody want to correct anything I've said? Have I misled anybody? Have I defrauded you? Anyone?
Any questions?
Yeah,
Now
this
we
is,
act like students now that when we ask our students question, they don't say nothing.
Well, I think
We-
having taught that, I've discovered that students who ask questions delay the departure of everyone else, and no one wants to be that person.
We do have one question. This question is, hold on a second. So the question is, a student who is taking a course here in a 2-year program, what type of opportunity could they expect to be able to do in fraud? So basically, what kind of a job could they expect to do having taken a course? Like if they were to take one course as part of their degree?
Mm-hmm. Well, they would be a value to the organization. As far as exactly where they would end up, let's assume that they're in the accounting auditing department. Having that skill set in a department where others didn't, having taken that course where others in that department didn't, puts them in a position to excel in that role when a fraud is uncovered, to become a very critical advisor to management. And that raises your profile significantly. That's really what happened to me in that very first job where I counted parking, did something as simple as counting parking spaces. It raised my profile. Prior to that, I was just a lowly general accountant handling a number of books, processing a number of transactions, making sure everything balanced. And then my star rose just because I was curious. This is before fraud training. I'm a suspicious person by nature, so that's how I got it. But having that skill set makes you a more valuable asset in any organization. And we talked about this a couple of days ago in terms of titles and where you might end up, where an individual might end up. A lot of organizations their fraud awareness and their deterrence, detection, and investigation departments are cloaked. I don't want to say they're hidden, but they're not really as obvious as you might think. There are fraud departments, but a lot of organizations, a lot of shareholders, a lot of board of trustees really don't like to see the word fraud in the organization chart. You know, director of fraud, you're like, oh, wait a minute, no, I don't think so. So there's a little reluctance to be out front with the potential that we can be subjected to a fraud. But that doesn't mean that organizations aren't grabbing people up left and right with the skill sets to manage it when it does happen and to help them protect themselves. So organizations are actively pursuing fraud examiners, people with CPEs, people with any kind of forensic training. Forensic accounting training is in demand all over right now, and that's great. That's great. It doesn't always, like as I said earlier, it doesn't always involve fraud, but it does. When fraud does happen, a forensic accountant is a good person to have. And the work that I had to do on that case we just talked about, I spent a year and a half doing the forensic accounting on that. I mean, that's pretty much all I did with analyzing bank statements and deposit tickets, et cetera, so we could prosecute, well, the case was being prosecuted, but so we could file a proper insurance claim. We were bonded, but we still, it was, the loss was well over the bond. So it was good to have somebody like myself on staff that knew how to handle those kind of transactions, knew how to put together that data, knew how to put it together in a way that it was understood by people who were not trained to. And that's always a plus. So did I get that question? I saw another one come in about the nature of whistleblowers.
Mm-hmm.
Does someone have the actual questions there? Because I've seen a couple pop up.
Yep. Yeah, it says that one says, what's the nature of the whistleblowers most times?
Whistleblower hotlines in organizations are a real critical step, as I said as well. Having that allows an organization to, in its initial stage anyway, have someone step forward anonymously to say, hey, you know, to see something, say something type of operation. I think, you know, Beverly in accounting is doing something. I'm not really sure the vendors she's creating are appropriate, and you know, just to create a sense that, hey, something's not right here. And then you send someone in to kind of look at it and look at the transactions, not too obviously. You want to take kind of a shotgun approach at that. You don't want to just jump on that one individual and start tearing their work apart. You tear a lot of people's work apart, even though that person may be the target. So whistleblowers can be very, very helpful in an organization in that they can point out things that you might not see in your day-to-day. And as I said, the number one finding, the number one reason fraud is found is because of whistleblowers. Somebody inside spoke. Now, hotlines have a interesting history. A lot of people use them just to gripe and complain. And my hat off to the people who have to handle these complaints. I mean, I've listened to stories from people who say half of our whistleblower complaints are somebody ate my sandwich out of the refrigerator. You know, it's a hotline complaint. People want to complain, so they use it to complain. But like I say, they serve a purpose, and it is an anti-fraud mechanism that is very effective. Next question.
I do have another one here. The question said, I was wondering when you talked about arresting people in the public to make sure others don't steal, does it affect the morale enough to justify doing it in public versus private?
That's an excellent question. There is a bit of a morale issue, but we have found through experience that it is overcome quickly. It turns, in many cases, the person that was the thief, if you will, the fraudster, wasn't very popular, and they're kind of glad to see it happen. But there is a risk in that. You know, I wouldn't recommend it every time, all the time, but we used it as a deterrent because word got around. We had 74 retail stores selling audio and visual equipment, highly merchandisable, highly trafficable. That stuff walks out the door. It's easily resold. And we had a lot of customers that were perpetrating fraud. And we had a lot of employees that were perpetrating fraud. I'll tell you a brief story. I was recruited to work for the organization. And they came to me and they said, we're losing 10% of our sales to customer theft. And at the time they had maybe a half dozen stores. They were trying to expand, but they couldn't expand because of the losses they were experiencing. And they said, we want to hire you to start a loss division, a fraud division, basically an audit division to help us manage this loss. I said, well, I asked them for some time for me to evaluate the problem. And I came back to them and I said, I will take the job. He said, great. But I said, you got to realize that you don't have a customer theft problem. And they said, what are you talking about? We're losing 10% of our revenues every year. I said, you're not giving customers your store keys. It's you have an employee theft problem. And when they realize that, because of course the employees are saying customers are stealing us blind. And management believes that, when the reality was employees were stealing them blind. So we put an end to that. And they were losing $3 million a year when I was hired. And 15 years later, they were still losing $3 million a year, but it was only 1% of sales. So, you know, we got proactive. We identified the real problem. You know, it's one of those, hey, look over there. That's where the problem is, and it wasn't. It was employees. So we did have customer theft, customer fraud as well. We had customers returning merchandise that they shouldn't have returned, for lack of a better word.
All right. I think this might be the the last we might take because of time. This question says, it seems that public arrest speaks to accountability within the organization. Isn't that a morale booster sometimes?
It can be. It can be. It certainly boosted the morale of the audit staff. You know, because when you are, my staff was often very, very upset over the fact that people were, you know, they knew what was going on, they knew what was happening, but they were really having a hard time building the case, and having that once a case was built against an employee or even group of employees who were colluding, once we were able to pull that together, take it to a DA, and I mean, realize the steps in this are complex, in that a lot of DAs don't want to hear about your store theft. They're not interested. They want to be pursuing something bigger, of course. So if you can get the attention of a DA and have them interested in pursuing the case, you give them the information, it has a tendency to build the morale in terms of your employees, your staff, the audit staff, especially. Management always liked that sort of thing. The store staff, we moved around occasionally, broke them up, move them around to avoid the collusion issue, but we never really got hard pushback from our employees saying, this is a terrible thing, we wish you wouldn't do it. So it was one of those things that people just accepted. Well, you know, Johnny was got arrested for stealing all that stuff. We had our suspicions about Johnny. He's that's pretty much it for him. And oftentimes we'd get successful prosecutions, and other times we wouldn't. Other times the DA would go, you know, this really isn't that interesting. But the fact of the matter is, we had gone through the process. We had done the job that we wanted to do. We turned it over to the right people, and it was up to them whether they pursued it any further or not. And so at the end of the day, we felt we had done a good job.
All right.
Hey, Matt, could I ask one last question?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, we've seen Enron and Jeffrey Skilling and Bernard Madoff and, you know, even Rick Ziske here. I mean, what do you think about those, I mean, multi-million, billion-dollar losses where people just like, hey, what happened? So what do you think happened there?
Oh, I think what happened there is the focus on the bottom line, the focus on being able to bring shareholders value became the motivating factor, and it became a matter of let's do this any way we can. And as a result, they stepped on their own toes. Bernie Madoff. I used to do a session on Ponzi schemes, which was had a heavy Bernie Madoff session. Talked specifically about how Ponzi schemes are successful, how they succeed, because people want them to succeed. The people who get involved in them want them to succeed. It's too good to be true, and they really hope it is true. As far as the Enrons, greedy corporations, the Jeffrey Skillings, the rest of them are trying to live up to shareholder expectations. And I think Health South is a good example of that. if you know the Health South story. I'm familiar with Aaron Beam. I've worked with Aaron with the ACFE. He was the CFO. He's the one who started Health South with the name escapes me, but he was really involved. And the bottom line was they needed to keep matching what Wall Street expected, and they had to do that by cooking the books. And they cooked the books, cooked the books, cooked the books. And the fact is, they're basically building a house of cards. Once you start doing that, your values become fantasy. And then once the public finds out, you're out of luck, and it's fraud. So it's greed is good.
All right. Thanks, Alan. We appreciate you doing this for us, and we're going to be sending more questions to you at your own private time, and hope you respond. Give us a little bit more answer.
Sure.
So I thank everybody really, and now you've had that in pursuing this and trying to. For those of you, the students, if you don't know, our accounting program is ranked number 3 in the nation, and we're trying to move that number to go up to even to number 1 by trying to bring additional programs that are very quality programs. So I thank my colleagues that are really working hard with me and the college supporting us to make this happen. So bringing going into forensic and fraud examination is one of the, right now we are really one of the top community colleges that are even offering programs in this area. So at this time, I'd like to bring Christy Cox, who's our career services person that always try to work hard to match our graduates to our students to good jobs. And if you have taken these accounting classes, Christy will pair you up like, no man's business. Now, remember, I always say accounting is mucho money, a lot of money. So, Christy, take it over, please.
Oh, well, thank you for that great introduction. And Mr. Brockman, thank you for this fascinating information. I really enjoyed it. And I'm going to share some information today, and hopefully we can tie some of these things in together. I'm certainly no expert in fraud, although now I'm really intrigued to want to read more. I am the Director of Career Services here at Central Piedmont, and I'm going to be sharing some information with you today about LinkedIn. And I'm just going to get my slideshow going here. Give me just 1 second to share this screen. Go, and hopefully it is popping up and everyone can see the title slide. Okay, great. Now I just need to find my presenter slide. We are rolling. And so, yeah, I am the Director of Career Services here at Central Piedmont. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and the best way usually to reach me is by email, although you will also find a lot of information on the Career Services website, that's listed here. We're going to spend just a few moments today going beyond the basics of LinkedIn. I think sometimes people get their LinkedIn account set up, especially students, and they let it sit, and that's not really helping you get anywhere. So we want to take some time today to really go beyond that. I want to talk to you specifically about following companies and industry leaders, and how do you use LinkedIn to find who you need to help you advance your career, and how do you connect with them. But first, you all know I love a good quote, and y'all, the NBA is back. I don't know if you've been having fun watching the Hornets, but I sure have. I found this great quote. He's not a Hornet. Tobias Harris actually plays for the 76ers, but I'm hoping to get some LaMelo quotes soon, y'all, I promise. But he says, you are not defined by your past. You are prepared by your past. And I think that is great. When you're first starting in your career, sometimes it can feel really intimidating if you don't have formal business or accounting or fraud examination experience yet, right? If you don't have these experiences yet, it can be really easy to feel like, where do I start and what do I do? But keep in mind, everything you've done up to this point prepares you for where you're going. And with LinkedIn, this is actually your billboard to the world. This is the public profile, the public social media that people can see about you. And you have the opportunity to craft your image and really showcase your skills and abilities so that people can find you and connect you with work. And so again, I want to talk just real quick about above and beyond. I'm going to sort of go out on a limb and expect that all of the faculty, and I'm hoping all of the students on this call today, already have LinkedIn profiles set up. And so I'm going to walk you quickly through what an example profile might look like and point out a few things that maybe you weren't aware of. And so first, having a profile photo is incredibly important. Members of profile photos get 21 more views. Remember, if you are searching for a job after graduation or while you're still in school, you want people to be able to find you. So if you have a photo, 21 more views, 9 times more connection requests, because that is the point of LinkedIn, right? Is for us to make connections and form relationships with other people. Your photo does not have to be, you don't have to spend hundreds of dollars to have a photo taken. You can ask a friend. The main thing is that you should be by yourself, no photos with your significant other or your dog or your family. So by yourself, friendly expression on your face, and dressed for the job that you want, but make sure that you're being authentic at the same time. Now, your headline is going to be right under your name. So you can see here on Samantha's profile, her headline is Marketing Graduate of Miami University. Should be engaging, eye-catching, and short. You're going to use it to spark conversations. And so you might say, yours might say something along the same lines, Human Resources Management student graduating in December 2021. So again, short and sweet. Your about statement is the next little paragraph below that. And this is kind of like your elevator pitch. You're going to emphasize what you're doing, what you're great at. Don't make this an objective statement. Don't make it dry. Let your personality come through. Just do your best to avoid buzzwords and cliches, those corporate cliches. You want to make sure that it's conversational and that you feel like you could own it. Now, keep in mind that LinkedIn is a Boolean search platform. So basically what that means is when somebody searches on LinkedIn, they search for specific keywords. This about section gives you a perfect opportunity to insert those keywords and have them pop up. So be thinking about the things that are going to draw employers to you. And also note that sometimes when we think about the things we know how to do, every single student I know at Central Piedmont knows how to put together a good presentation using PowerPoint. And so you might be tempted to, take it easy and just say, I've got PowerPoint skills, but imagine how much more powerful that statement would be if you called it instead, perhaps data presentation, right? So think about not just the tool that you know how to use, but what you can do with that tool and what that would mean to a future employer. So the next step, like I said, this is a connection tool. It's for people, it's like your billboard, people can see you, but we also want you to connect. But it can be hard at first. You're like, who do I follow? Who do I connect with? And so I'm going to give you some ideas now. And at the very end of this presentation, I'm going to have a quick activity for you all to complete on your own time. It's really simple, I promise, but it's going to improve your LinkedIn usability 10 times over. So, but the first thing you want to think about is who are the companies that you want to work for, right? What are your dream companies? Think about who are the companies here in Charlotte, who are the companies nationwide. Maybe you have aspirations to move overseas at some point. Who are those companies? They have, I promise you, a profile on LinkedIn, and some are more active than others in posting, but you can go ahead and follow. And the nice thing about that is anytime you're following that topic, information is going to pop in your feed about them. So every day I get notifications because I follow Bank of America. So every day I get notifications about what Bank of America is up to. So that is one way to find just places, companies to follow, industry leaders. Think about the thought leaders in your industry. You just had a wonderful, knowledgeable expert in the field of fraud investigation spend some time with you and share some of his expertise with you. And so this would be a good person to follow on LinkedIn, perhaps. I don't know how active you are on LinkedIn, Mr. Brockman, but if you're posting regularly, I'm going to send an invitation. I'm going to follow you. But I'd encourage anybody else who's interested in this field to do the same. Staying up on these industry trends is so important because it allows you to be a more well-rounded candidate. And also, as you are thinking about your future, both here at CP and beyond, it helps you to make better decisions about what's going to serve you and what direction you should go, maybe what classes you should take, what jobs you should pursue, what extracurriculars you should get involved in. It's also going to help you kind of keep up, like I said, with the companies that you're interested in. You can like what they're working on. You can talk about what they're working on. You can engage in conversations. This type of activity will show up on your profile. So if I'm a recruiter and I'm searching for somebody and I see that you've been following my company and staying engaged, that's going to make me really, really interested in talking to you a little bit further about positions at my company. And so finally, I want you to work on too, this is the final thing, finding your people on LinkedIn. So sometimes people are like, well, who do I connect with? Well, one, you should be connecting with the people who are in your class, right? Your first line of networking are your peers. I can't tell you, I have lost count how many times I have talked to a former classmate of mine and we have helped each other either connect with projects. Actually, the job I took when I came to North Carolina, it was a classmate of mine who informed me that job was going on. And the only way that would have happened is if he and I were keeping in touch. And so that's a really good reason. And so again, keep in touch with the people around you, your peers in class. Search for Central Piedmont Community College alumni. I'm going to see if I can get this to work for us real quick and show you what this looks like. So LinkedIn is pretty straightforward. They've got a little search bar up here. And I'm going to say I tried to search earlier and the site was down. Oh, okay. So I couldn't find them. I don't know what's going on and why LinkedIn is not liking CP's page right now, but we're going to follow UNC Charlotte instead. So here's UNC Charlotte, right? Which we know we have a lot of students who have aspirations to go there. And if you'll see, this is sort of their summary, but right here is a tab that says alumni. Now, if I click on alumni, I can search for alumni from this university. So there's 147,000 alumni from UNC Charlotte in the area. I'm going to narrow that down a little bit and say I'm really kind of interested in people who maybe have been in school for the last few years, right? I'm going to let that refresh. I could see 27,000 of them are here in Charlotte. I can get a sense for where they work. You can expand that even more. And if you use the scroll bar, you could see what they studied. So I'm just going to click on accounting because here we are. If I scroll down to the bottom, these are folks, these are people who attended UNC Charlotte and listed accounting as one of their fields of study. And so as a student, if you would like to know more perhaps about some of the things that alumni are doing, some of the jobs, you can get some better ideas of maybe where they're working, what kind of roles they're in. This would be a good way to find them and to connect with them. So really easy to do. And again, I just recommend everybody try that. And finally, when you find someone you want to connect with, you need to actually reach out and connect with them. Now, LinkedIn will send a real generic connection request, and it's sort of a red flag to any of us on LinkedIn that you just didn't put a lot of thought into it. You just hit connect. If you want to get somebody to respond, personalize it, make it short and sweet. You could say something like, I'm a student at Central Piedmont Community College. I'm majoring in accounting and finance. I'm interested in fraud investigation. Would you have time in the next few weeks to meet for an informational interview? It's only 300 characters, so you can't get overly wordy with it, but short and sweet and to the point, explains what you're interested in and definitely includes the ask or the thing that you want from them. I have had people reach out to me on LinkedIn before and they'll just say, hi. And I don't know what you need. So always be intentional and think about your ask. And I know that sometimes this feels kind of new and a little bit awkward for people. So if you ever need some help or coaching and like, how do I set this up? Just email me and let me know. We can talk it through real quick. Okay, so finally, quick activity. Everybody get ready to write something down because I don't want to go over on time here. But this activity, like I said, it's going to up your LinkedIn game pretty well. So first, you want to evaluate your own profile. So a lot of us, when we start a profile, we just put the bare basics on it. I want you to do some self-reflection. Think about the 5 words that you would really want people to use to describe you. And it might be that you're really enthusiastic. That's a big one of mine, enthusiastic. But you might think, I'm a skilled communicator. I'm a problem solver. I'm really detail oriented. I have a great work ethic. Think about what are the 5 keywords you want people to think of when they think of you. And then look at that profile that you've written. Do those 5 words come out? Does that profile exude that energy and that vibe and those words? Because if it doesn't, you need to do some revisions. And again, I can help you, or our career counselors in our department, we would love to help you with this. And we love working with students on their LinkedIn profiles. So if you'd like some help with that, please reach out. The second activity I'm going to ask everyone to do is I'm going to ask you to locate 3 companies and follow them. It could be a company that you're interested in working for, like a dream organization. It could be a company that you're just really interested in because you like their business practices. Even though it's not in the field or industry that you're interested in, you've come in contact with them and you think they're great. Follow 3 companies. This is going to start to populate your LinkedIn timeline so that every time you sign in, you're going to get some new information. And finally, locate 3 thought leaders in your industry. 3 thought leaders. Thought leaders are simply people who are doing what they do and they do it well. They're influencers, basically. They can be CEOs, they could be COOs, they could be faculty. There's just a wealth of people that you can find. Watch some TED videos and you will find plenty of people to follow on LinkedIn. Trust, some really interesting people. So again, just doing these quick little activities shouldn't take you more than 10 or 15 minutes, but it's really going to get your LinkedIn profile more engaged and give you more opportunities with this tool. And so finally, I wanted to give everyone a quick chance. There are 3 links that are helpful to use. The first is our career guide. This is a booklet that my department puts out every year. It has a lot of resumes, like resume examples, cover letters, also got tips on how to use LinkedIn. The middle link is actually an event series that LinkedIn produced last year, sort of a live panel discussion. And each of the episodes are about an hour long, sort of a little lengthy, but it's people who are just experts in all sorts of different industries talking about how they use this tool. So if you really want to become a power user, this is a really good resource. And finally, the LinkedIn profile checklist is exactly what it sounds like. It's a 1-page, or actually I think it's 2 pages, a 2-page document that walks you through as a student every single thing, all of the basics that you should have and how you can really expand on your LinkedIn profile and make it professional. So with that said, I'd like to ask and give just a moment if anyone has any questions. Again, my contact information is on the screen. Do not hesitate to reach out to me or to any of the counselors in career services. But does anyone have any questions? Okay, and seeing none in the chat box, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to Matt. Thank you so much for letting me talk today. I appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, Christy. And, so you're always doing this good job and making sure that our effort getting to a completion. So, because when our students get out and they don't have no job, then our effort is not complete. So you're doing the most critical part of the effort of everybody here. So so our students, I think you've had this, and one thing I like to remind you is that the college is now anti-educator institution, affiliated a partner to ACFE, and as a result of that, some benefits have come to us. ACFE has some scholarship information for students that are interested to go into fraud, forensic, and fraud investigation. So you can apply for the scholarship, or we have the information. We're currently going to, in the spring, offering 2 fraud courses, forensic and cybersecurity course, and then fraud examination. So I will encourage you to register for that course, and it will brief in, it will beef up your resume and beef up your, so according to the study of ACFE, if you have the certification attached to your credentials, then you're going to earn 25% more than those who are not certified, certified. So we're trying to bring a good thing here for you. So again, I thank all the Faculty of Business and Accounting, so because they are also, making this happen and working very hard. And I thank everybody that is with us today. Those students that are in my class that attended this, remember I told you that you may have some type of extra credit for this effort. So do see some of your names there. So then again, Alan, thanks for coming to do this for us on a very short notice. That was very wonderful of you. And of course, we're going to be reaching out to you more as we continue to expand this program. So I thank everybody. It's a collective effort, business and accounting faculty, then accounting faculty also. But so we're going to make it happen. We're going to. So next year is going to be a brand new program and brand new things happening. So with that, I think we just right on our time. So I also thank our associate dean who has been very helpful pushing for this new program to to come on board. And I think we got it on board now. So by spring we'll be flying. So that's I think we just right at the tail end of our time. We're supposed to be ending this program at 3:15, and what I'm seeing now is 3:14. So again, thank you all, and have a good rest of the week for you.
Hello, I just wanted to mention real quick, we'll have another student leadership series session January 19th at 2 p.m. and it will showcase the medical office administration and office administration program.
Thanks, Basit, for reminding me that. I think I got carried away with my fraud distance. Thanks for, yes, we do have that coming up. There is nothing in December, so you're free in December, but then in January 19th, so yes, office administration and medical office will take on.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, Basit.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank
So with that, I would say good night to everybody.
Have a good week.
Yep. Thank you.